Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome wherever you are joining from across the Commonwealth. I'm Rachel Trenter. I'm a trustee of the Commonwealth Heritage Forum, and this talk is part of a series that the Commonwealth Heritage Forum has put together, focusing particularly on ironworks across the Commonwealth. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ian Tan today. So Ian's going to talk to us about his research. And Ian is in Hong Kong today, and he is talking to us about the iron skeleton and imperial skin materiality and constructing modernity in colonial Hong Kong and Singapore. And his talk is going to particularly focus on iron in the colonial era in both Hong Kong and Singapore. It's based on his PhD research, and he's going to talk about the structures and how they operate as mediators between different communities within that time frame. So we will have some time for questions at the end. So please do either put them in the chat, or as we're a small group, you can just ask. We have a bit of a conversation with Ian at the end of his talk. So I will hand over to you. Thank you very much. Oh, Ian, I think your audio has stopped working. It was working before. Is it because you've plugged in your headphones?
Hi. Yes. Okay. Must be one of those weird things on the on technology. So as I was saying, I would like to first start by acknowledging the Commonwealth Heritage Forum for organizing today's event, and of course, Rachel for stepping as the chairperson for today. And why is that so? That's because the original chairman, which is Mr. Kevin Ang, Director of Conservation Management at Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority. He's not feeling very well today. So thank you, Rachel, for stepping up. And of course, to all of you for being here with me for this event. And it's always nice to see familiar names as well. So I'm just going to nip into the other screen and present my slides. And I'll look at you guys again later on. So feel free to just leave your questions in the chat, and looking forward to a great interaction later on. So further ado, let's begin. So today's talk is mainly focusing on the architectural history of the material iron, and we'll try to review the context of their making and subsequent transfer into Hong Kong and Singapore from its place of origins in the UK and Europe. Iron as a structural material has been around for about 2 centuries. It gained popularity in the 19th century as European lifestyle changed and evolved with the urban changes caused by Industrial Revolution. Iron was a strong representation of the process of industrializing, and it's also synonymous with machines for mobility, with trains and ships. More importantly, it was also used for architecture built to facilitate machines, such as train stations and harbors. Taken as a whole, iron allowed construction to become a commodity, with manufacturing assembly conducted in different places, in stages, and then subsequently moved across the world. So it's no surprise that iron had been traveling across Europe, Britain, and the rest of the world by steam propelled transport. This has made the world smaller because transportation since the mid 19th century has become a lot more predictable and regular. Yet, it is not the grand buildings that we see the growing popularity of iron. It is instead in everyday Victorian life where iron was imagined in different architectural contexts and social norms. Iron as a superior material in terms of compression and tensile, and had the ability to span across wider distance compared to other materials. And last but not least, it is also less likely to catch fire, which made it vital to support exchange of goods and people, information and knowledge across the sea and the land. Like the image you see here, iron played an important part in urban space formation. Structures such as public urinal, which is in the middle of the picture, Drinking fountains and even benches reproduce social relationships and promote behavior considered important in a crowded urban setting. Fountains promoted health, urinals promoted proper hygiene, while strip lamps and shop fronts brought people out to the streets for longer periods throughout the day. So the colonies themselves, like Singapore and Hong Kong, they are not immune to such fashion that's sweeping across the Western world. Uh, Both places are significant sites for exchanging goods, capital, and labor. They also function as showpiece city, where the economic and technological benefits of the Industrial Revolution were put on display. So the introduction of iron came with new municipal services such as pipe water, sewage systems, and toilets on one end of the spectrum. And on the other, as you see in this picture, they also serve as imperial urban ornaments. So there's a lot of research going on in the style of iron architecture found in Britain and exported overseas. As esteemed college in the rest of these Heritage Forum series, they will be sharing either last week or in the following weeks. But my research gap seems to be saying that not many people have been trying to analyze the significance of iron architecture from the perspective of the port cities themselves and think about the reasons why they were introduced, apart from being the aesthetic. I research on how iron contributes to the maritime and urban development of port cities. Firstly, it suggests that the rise of iron as a building material reveals the changes brought by the development of steamships, which greatly shortened communications and tightened control between the metropole and the periphery after the mid 19th century. What it means in terms of architecture is that civic and military power could order structures from Britain to its colonies. Buildings could be built quickly and then cladded with non-load bearing stone veneers and plasterwork. This introduced correct classical proportions and exaggerated facade ornaments without worrying about the structural forces. Secondly, my own research attempts to rethink this idea that iron architecture outside of Britain are just replicas of similar structures found in Britain. Instead, I see port cities as key sites for exchanging architectural ideas, building forms, and construction practices. So, iron as a kind of a research topic offers the environment and the space to think about how labor, materials, technologies, and ideas could circulate across different networks such as trade, migration, intellectual, etc. It also means that a new building type that emerges in the colonies cannot be simply taken at face value as a simple technology transfer. Instead, the choice of materials and the building techniques had to undergo a series of negotiation within a network of colonial authorities, foreign and native business interests, as well as the movement of professionals and craftsmen across port cities, either regionally or internationally. I'll be presenting two case studies today. One is on the lighthouse, and the other is on iron markets in Singapore and Hong Kong. And both of them tries to illustrate the key points of my thesis, which is about urban spatial control and architectural production as a joint enterprise between different parties, especially between the engineers and the local craftsmen. So lighthouse is a kind of a building type which represents the regional and transoceanic cooperation required amongst empires and countries. This is so because they had to facilitate global trade, and each has to do their part to light up the trade routes and provide a strong beacon on the shores for safer navigation. So the case studies of Horsburgh Lighthouse and Gap Rock Lighthouse in Singapore and Hong Kong respectively would highlight these lengthy debates and multiple designs that had to be drawn up by the colonial authorities to decide if a new material and structural system is necessary, or could they adopt the existing material and structures that local craftsmen can build in order to create or to replicate or to sort of move that kind of a new building type from Britain over to the colony. Lighthouses are some of the earliest form of modern buildings to be considered for prefabrication. There are several reasons why that is so. For example, um, labor costs could be higher at the point of destination than at the place of manufacturing. This tends to be the case because the site where you put the lighthouse is very remote and it's really difficult to work there. So the cost is higher, which makes iron prefabrication a lot more viable. The cost is also worthwhile if it enables the construction process to be accelerated. Because remember, there is a race going on. Each country is racing to light up its shores, not for competition, but for cooperation. Because ultimately, when you light up your part of the shore, it helps to accelerate the trade across the whole route. So on some sites, iron is the only practical option. In the 19th century, Britain's lead in the iron industry gave it access to unusual markets, such as making iron lighthouses in the colonies, as you see in this picture here. By the mid 19th century, there are two types of lighthouses. The first is a solid trunk type shaped like a cone, which you see on the left, and they are similar to a masonry structure. The second is an open type, developed in response to the crew pile, which you see on the right. Both types originated in Britain and were prefabricated and exported elsewhere by nature of its height. Iron towers were also illustrated for public consumption during trial erections in Britain before export, as you can see on this picture in the left. So I come to my first case study in Singapore, which is where I'm from. Hosburg Lighthouse is still an active lighthouse today. It marks the eastern entrance to the Straits of Singapore. It was completed in 1851, making it one of the oldest, if not the oldest, working lighthouse in Southeast Asia. It commemorates James Hosburg, a Scottish hydrographer who mapped seaways around Asia during the 19th century. He mapped shallow areas on the China-India route, allowing for safe navigation of the South China Sea. The lighthouse, designed by engineer J.T. Thomson, marks early efforts to light up the seas for safe navigation. They are also important for mercantile cargo ships carrying valuable and urgent assignments, which requires them to travel in darkness. So any delays, accidents pose considerable financial loss and reputational risk to the merchants themselves. So it makes good sense for the merchants and the colonial governments to work together to build these lighthouses. So I'm probably not going to dive too much into the financial side of the building, but I'm going to focus more on the technical aspects and the architectural aspects of lighthouse building today. So even though today the Hosburg Lighthouse is built in granite stone, but the use of iron was constantly in discussion before and during its construction. There was debate over the material and the labor costs and the type of expertise needed to construct the lighthouse as quickly as possible. It reflected the numerous uncertainties and anxieties concerning the lighthouse construction, particularly the reliance upon builders who were unfamiliar with the lighthouse and the technical specificities of the building type itself. So paintings like this by Thomson himself explain little, but suggested to his sponsors and patrons in London and elsewhere what is going on during the construction. On one hand, it showed local builders who has acclimatized themselves to working with the available materials, which is granite, and they have adapted to the technical requirements of creating a lighthouse, even though they have never seen one before. And on the other side, you have technical drawings of the lighthouse. So both technical drawings and sketches of how the workers operated offered some clues to the construction process of the lighthouse, despite the uncertainties of the climate and the difficulty of the terrain that they are working on, which normally you don't really talk about them in correspondence and reflect them in the drawings. So these images suggest a kind of a communications and standardization of the building process, much like the technical drawings, sketches of how workers had to move. It sort of suggests a kind of a codification of their work and a kind of a order and hierarchy which transcends the language barrier between the British engineers and the local craftsmen. The use of drawings also helped delegate responsibility by allowing instructions to be passed from Thompson to the foreman and thereafter to every native craftsman in the small work gangs. So as they become familiar with the workflow, efficiency and the ability to troubleshoot would improve as well. Yet given the prestige of the project, there has been intense debate whether an iron alternative would be better in terms of cost, schedule, and security. For example, Alexander Gordon, who is an esteemed marine engineer in Britain and the inventor of the Iron Trunk Lighthouse, he published in a trade journal saying that an iron lighthouse for Horsburgh would be best for Singapore. So I quote him: justice to the shipping interests of the empire, such that all our colonial and foreign sea lights could be erected and maintained at the smallest possible cost, consistent with perfect efficiency and with the loss of as little time as possible. He claimed that the construction made of wrought iron would be perfectly secure against guns, as seen in this picture here. And there's this perception of impenetrability because of the use of iron, which will also project Britain's military might at that time. And it also will address the kind of a piracy issues that was prevalent in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore then. So he even allocated space in the lower area, which you can see on the right side picture, where there will be howitzers or big guns that will provide armed sentry for the straits in order to, to deter the pirates from entering Singapore. With the inauguration of Singapore's Horsburgh Lighthouse in 1852, now we move on to Hong Kong. Why is that so? Because in the same year that Horsburgh Lighthouse is completed, maritime traffic between Singapore and Hong Kong grew exponentially. China-bound ships from Singapore made up about 30% of the marine vessels entering Hong Kong that year. The increase in sea traffic and the improved speed of sea vessels evolving from wind-powered to coal-powered steamships placed even greater demand for expediency and reliability in terms of shipping. It became critical to have lighthouses in Hong Kong waters, not only to mark the dangerous shallow waters, but also to provide reliable maritime communications such that the ships could travel in darkness at night. So even though Hong Kong had lighthouses around the 1960s, they were insufficient. It appeared that their usefulness were not evident by the 1880s. So by September of 1886, there was discussion between Hong Kong and the Qing Imperial government to build lighthouses further away from Hong Kong on the approach going into the harbor itself. As Hong Kong Island was a colony, or rather it was under British rule. The rest of the islands around it wasn't. So in order to build lighthouses offshore from Hong Kong, they had to discuss with the Qing Empire. Because of that, the chairman of Hong Kong's General Chamber of Commerce directly negotiated with Robert Hart, who is the Inspector General of the Chinese Imperial Customs, and they drew up plans for a lighthouse on Gap Rock, which is a tiny island 50 kilometers southwest of Hong Kong. And he appointed David Ma Henderson as the engineer in charge of lighthouses then to give a kind of a figure to construct a lighthouse on Gap Rock itself, for which he suggested 45,000, which is the standard price that was given for prefabricated iron lighthouses that has been used across the whole of China coast. So the proposed lighthouse will probably have the same specifications with the other lighthouses across the coast itself. These are first order lighthouses, which could exhibit a white light up to 23 nautical miles. So they include like the examples that you see on the right hand side, Sha Wei Shan and Gavna's lighthouse, which are both located in Shanghai. And they have been planned as a series of lighthouses that could be manufactured very quickly, assembled, and then used to illuminate the mouth of the Yangtze River, which is an important um, sea route, or rather a river route for cargo. Henderson's proposal for Gap Rock in 1872, um, it was not really supported by actual surveys of the environmental conditions and the kinds of the site conditions on the tiny island. In fact, it was only in 1887, or about 7 months, when they first started the communications to build a lighthouse, that he first stepped on to Hong Kong to conduct his survey. But on going into Gap Rock, he realized that the light would not be ready in 3 years. He explained the difficulties in excavating the rocky reef and preparing a site flat enough to assemble and erect a iron lighthouse. So as you can see in this picture, um, it had to be absolutely flat because everything has been prefabricated in in London or other parts of England, and then they are transported there. So without a flat surface, the lighthouse will not be able to stand and be able to support the light on top of it. So instead, he suggested a alternative island about a mile away, but it was not as favorable as Gap Rock itself in terms of the orientation. So this is the sketch that resulted from um, his suggestion to build not on Gap Rock, but the rock closest to Gap Rock itself. But it was clear that in order for the lighthouse to stand on flat land, it had to take a lot of effort to level the volcanic bedrock. So, of course, what he suggested didn't sit very well with the mariners and survey experts in Hong Kong at that time. They were dead against his suggestions. So, everyone concluded that the only location that is proper had to be Gap Rock. So, in the face of protests and insurmountable challenges to construct an iron structure on a rock, the government decided to fall back onto masonry. And it was a technology that is well established for colonial buildings and infrastructure by that time. Hence, the contract for Gap Rock was granted to Zhang Keng, who was a reputable contractor known for low bids, excellent craftsmanship, etc., etc. Yet, despite all this good reputation, his team still took about 6 months before they could successfully set up the kind of a groundwork needed to land on the island and to transport the materials to build on the island itself. So a correspondence recount how difficult it was to build, and he took some pictures of the process, which you can see on the left, how they had to hoist themselves up using this crane, and the boat itself could not even get close to the rock. The choice of using granite in Hong Kong for common construction is because it is a material that is available in abundance on the island, and it is also something that craftsmen have been using for centuries. So the way that they organize the work gangs around how to dress it and how to build is well documented by many writers and engineers, as you can see in this couple of drawings done by a engineer in the Royal Army. Furthermore, the harsh working conditions meant that the stonemasons working on Gap Rock had to be given the most flexibility to design the base course of the masonry tower in order to accommodate the profile of the rocky slopes. So this minimized the need to excavate the existing rocks and to anchor every granite block to the face of in situ rocks for structural stability, which is why for both Gap Rock and for Horsburgh, which is on the left and right respectively, neither of them are built in iron, which is kind of peculiar because today we are talking about iron structures, right? But the point I'm trying to point out really is that the construction of lighthouses shows that the the material over one another is really not arbitrary, and it's not because of style, as sometimes we would encounter when describing this kind of historical structures. Instead, by diving a little bit more into its history, we realize that iron and masonry emerged as the two main materials for lighthouse construction during this period of time. And the choice for one over another was really dependent on the difficulties of the environment, the availability of the materials, and whether there are skilled workers willing to take on the hard work. Only in the absence of cheap material and manpower, iron became the preferred material. Prefabrication would allow standardized building parts to be manufactured, shipped, and assembled without sophisticated equipment and skills. Yet, despite its significance, the choice of material is often left out of architectural history discourses. So, in case you're wondering how these two lighthouses look like today, here are a couple of pictures, and I also take this chance to just have a quick sip of water as well. So I move on to the next section, which is the second case study on iron markets. So I promise you, I'm really going to talk about iron this time around. So no more masonry as a stand-in for my discussion today. So this section focuses on the construction of Tolo Air Market, which is a national monument in Singapore, and the third generation Central Market, which has been demolished in the 1920s. It's replaced by a streamlined modern building, which was revitalized recently. So I have put pictures of both buildings, the modern look, at the end of this section. So we shall see them later on. And these are the two pictures of what they look like in the past. So, as former British colonies, Singapore and Hong Kong's governance structure derived from a British model, such as having sanitary boards and municipal bodies to govern the health of urban settlements and to control the spread of diseases. So, Singapore passed a new ordinance in 1887 to formalize the Municipal Commission, while Hong Kong established the same, which is a sanitary board, in 1888. In 1883, so these bodies hold regulatory power to supervise and control all matters relating to sanitations. They commission improvement work such as constructing water systems and drainage, which benefited the entire population rather than just selected groups of users. And in relation to public health improvements, we realized that a lot of discussions in the meeting notes would talk about markets. These markets were constructed not just as public amenities, but they are also public health spaces that actively prevented epidemics from happening. And this is done by using architecture to regulate and survey people's sanitary behavior. So the first iron market in Singapore was Clyde Terrace, which you can see two views of it, one completed, the other during construction. So it was the first iron market constructed in 1870. It was then the town market, and it came hot on the heel of an expanding urban population. So the ease of prefabrication and assembly made it easy for subsequent engineers to adopt iron frameworks as the standard for markets in Singapore. So Tolo Air replaced an earlier market of the same name a distance away, and it was considered to be a signature project given its high visibility along Collyer Quay. It was also one of the few municipal buildings accessible to the public. So what does it look like? The single-story octagonal structure designed by James McRitchie assembled the spokes and hub of a wheel with 8 alleys radiating out from a central pavilion. McRitchie's design specified cast iron components from a few British foundries, which demonstrated his skills in integrating different components to form a unique design, as you can see in these two pictures over here. It also overturns the common assumption that engineers usually um, import wholesale from pattern books and manufacture catalogs. So in fact, as you'll see in the next slide, it comes from different manufacturers, which we managed to trace down from historical records. So for example, the main iron structure was manufactured by Scottish foundries, as you can see over here, P.W. Macallan and Macfarlane. And the clock tower is manufactured by Merhead and Co., which is a mechanical engineering firm from Kent. So the good fit between these iron elements was possible because they used standardized fittings, which originated from prefabricated iron barracks used by the British Army. So they were the first to standardize what kind of bolts and nuts had to be used and the dimensions. So the market referenced, of course, the design of Crystal Palace, but instead of glass, as is usual for this kind of iron structures in the Western world, the roof is cladded with local terracotta tiles, which better adapted to the local environment. The importance of maintaining good sanitation in the markets meant that the design of these markets ascribed to a high level of hygiene. So apart from engineering properties, iron was also then believed to promote good, it was also believed to be germ resistant, which is why in this building, the whole skeleton, the iron skeleton is made up of cast iron itself. So on one hand, the strong compression strength of iron and its high malleability created large volumes and openings that emitted more air and light, which promoted good ventilation. This is also linked to good health and also to the moral and civic progress of the modern world at that time because it improved the urban image of dark native markets and dodgy street bazaars. So, of course, these pictures are not taken in the 19th century. This dates from 1970s before its relocation. But even then, you could see how tall the openings were and how spacious it is as compared to the size of the users themselves. And in fact, in 1889, there's an article in Lancet, which is a medical journal. They talk about how the use of iron in Crystal Palace and in the Paris Expo, they made the buildings more sanitary and safer for the users. The writer claimed that a non-absorbent iron roof made a building less likely to be impenetratable by germs. Other articles also advocated the use of iron for hospitals and slaughterhouses to prevent miasma and subsequently germs. So the Lancet was influential also in the colonies itself. It was not just something that was read in Britain, but in fact, the local newspapers would summarize articles on tropical disease and public health locally. Therefore, Tolo Aya's market's design, which is tall and airy, probably resulted from sanitary consideration just as much as aesthetics considerations. While there's engineering to optimize the environmental conditions, you also need people to police good sanitation standards and behavior. So British and Eurasian inspector of nuisance, as well as their local assistants, they would reinforce the public health ordinance in the markets. And of course, you see them wearing the uniforms. In a way, their uniforms also resemble the policemen's ones as well. So the circulation of Telok Ayer market would also follow a panopticon arrangement, whereby a circular building could control the movement or to regulate movement and maintain good surveillance of the goods being sold. The intent of using architecture to discipline the market, the vendors, the users, and even the animals that are being sold inside became quite evident when you look at how a new police station was built along the same axis as the market. So sharing the same axis or the plot is a public toilet, which is in red on the right hand side, and then you which is used by the working class, and in the middle of between the market and the toilet is the police station. So it's also speculated that not just the inspectors of nuisance, but also the constables were called upon to handle public order and public hygiene issues in the markets themselves. Another example, and just briefly about this diagram on the left, I talk about this panopticon kind of arrangement. This is what I meant, where in the middle, you could actually see the whole building, and you could look across both the covered walkways as well as the openings that have an air well, as you can see on the right-hand side. So a newspaper article in 1895 mentioned how the stores were arranged down the covered walkways that radiated out from the central pavilion, and they had wide passageways that were kept free of obstructions. So each store consists of an iron table with a slab of concrete and divided into quadrants for different vendors to use. So in a way, unlike a native bazaar where they probably had the freedom to arrange how they want to display their goods, in this market, everything is highly regulated and had to be approved by the authorities before selling could happen. And also, unlike in the native bazaar, the vendors are clustered according to what they sell. So dry goods and vegetables, which are cleaner or less filthy, for example, they occupied the covered walkways, while else the offensive traits such as poultry and cattle, which generally has odor and waste, they will occupy the air wells, which you can see on the right hand side. And those are open to the sky. And also there are taps. So it means that the slabs could be washed down easily. So now I moved back to Hong Kong again in comparison to Telok Ayer Market. So while Telok Ayer Market in Singapore had a open iron lattice work, the one in Hong Kong, which is Central Market, had a solid granite base and a facing brick wall exterior that sort of hides its iron interior. And the choice to design a masonry shell was probably in compliance with regulations at that time, which stipulates the use of stone and brick for fire prevention and also to harmonize with the whole riverfront. And even until today, the skyline of Hong Kong is one of the aspects of the city that is quite distinctive. And the neoclassical architecture that you see for Central Market, it adapted features from Hungerford Market in London, and it had a symmetrical facade layout, rusticated ground floor facades, and rounded archways openings. So, um, but by no means are they a replica or a kind of a transplantation of Western colonial architecture into Hong Kong, because you also have the use of local pen and roll tiles on the roof itself. The use of iron, which is kind of distinctive for this structure at that time, it could be dated back to a recommendation that was made in a sanitary report in 1882 by Hosbert Chadwick, who is the son of Edwin Chadwick, who is a sanitarian as well. And he highlighted how the market's use of structural materials like stone and timber could breed diseases. And at that time, there was talk about bad air or miasma. So he recommended the use of lightweight and impervious iron instead, as you can see over here. In fact, with the light streaming into the space itself, one could argue that you can't really see the iron anymore. The iron sort of fades into the background. The plans for a new central market were prepared in 1886 in response to the report in 1882. It was designed by John Price, who is the Surveyor General and the President of the Sanitary Board at that time. So obviously, he knew that iron was a beneficial material from the context of believing that it is more sanitary, it doesn't harbor germs, and also at the same time, he was thinking about glass. So in fact, the early version of the design is not using a tiled roof. It was using a glass roof. And according to the architectural historian Gavin Stam, where he talked about Victoria London, and he was saying that the use of large light and hygiene, the use of iron and glass created large light and hygienic covered spaces, which align to the sanitary and civic standards of modernity of its time. Let's talk about, however, and using this example of Central Market in Hong Kong, is how these glass windows, which of course is no longer used for the roof, it's just used for the windows on the sides, is that they are operational. They could be operated, they could be open. And one, it caters to the different seasons in subtropical Hong Kong. And second, it could also carry the bad odors at that time emitting from the stores, which were then believed to cause diseases through miasma. And of course, common knowledge these days is that if you have many people in the same space, airborne diseases tends to be carried away if you have better ventilation. So the galleries of windows at that time provided ample light and air to flush out the foul smells, and every window could also be operated to suit the comfort of its users. But there are further outlets through discrete air inlets near the floor levels on both stories, which are on the side, and they carry away the soot and foul odors produced not by the stores themselves, but by the gas lights. So it was also one of the first buildings at that time that has gas lamps. So the gas lamp itself will produce a lot of dark gas, right? A lot of black smoke, and the gas lamps itself were needed despite the uncomfort that the soot causes is because the market had to open from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day. So it caters almost to the 24 hours operation of the port cities, even in the late 19th century. So a mini conclusion to this chapter is that by focusing on the construction of 19th century markets in Singapore and Hong Kong, we try to understand the influence of public health on building design and its significant role in regulating the space inside a market, which often building design using iron dam was taken for granted. And of course, nowadays, the same. Because of mechanical design, mechanical services, we tend to neglect the importance of space and health, unless it is a very specialized building. So I hope my research into markets, into iron markets, offers new ways to articulate the heritage value of a building by understanding and interpreting it from different approaches, for example, social, economic, and political aspects, rather than just the kind of a standard um, fixation nowadays on the appearance, the age, and how rare the structure is. And of course, I'm biased in this case, but I think that the use of materials, especially imported materials that emerged as a result of the Industrial Revolution, it helps us to rethink the neutrality of building materials as a material that is static. And we can start to imagine it is a dynamic material that not only travels across the world, but it also could help to preserve, challenge, or expose prevailing attitudes, ethics, and other forces at play. So as I promised earlier, this is what Central Market and Tolo Iron Market looks like today. One has been preserved, the other has been rebuilt in the 1920s, and nowadays, and it has just been revitalized in Hong Kong, which is the picture on the left. So by way of a conclusion, I would just like to raise some interesting issues for discussions for this last part. So bear with me, 2 more minutes. There are some interesting observations which I have made over the years in regards to iron as a material, and also how to interpret them in regards to ideas of authenticity, integrity, and uniqueness. So, for example, how do you consider um, the the value of this kind of structures, which tends to be quite utilitarian in a historic building itself? And what if the same kind of a pattern is replicated across different historic buildings? So is it still considered to be a important character defining element, or is something that, with times you might consider to replace them or to insert a replacement which is not made of iron itself? Or in this case, what if there's multiple copies of the same monument across the world? How do we evaluate the significance of the structure if it's not unique and there are multiple copies across the empire or across different cities in this case? And finally, by nature of its prefabrication assembly process, should the heritage of an iron structure be disassociated from its context? For example, this fountain used to be in front of a market in Singapore, and after many years, it is then sold and then reassembled in the courtyard of Raffles Hotel. So, how do we evaluate its heritage significance? Is it belonging to the market itself, which has been demolished, or do we associate more now with the heritage of Raffles Hotel, which by itself is also a 19th century building? So, of course, one last issue is what if another, for example, another building like Blake Pier in Hong Kong, which has been moved from one place to another over the years, how does it affect the reading of its original context and the ability to experience its original function and intensity? Because of course, when Blake Pier was in central in Hong Kong, it was in the heart of the action. Whereas nowadays it is placed in a very quiet shore. There's only one boat every week. So there's only one ferry. So it doesn't recreate the kind of intensity of activities, commerce, and people that was there 100, 200 years ago. So that's it for me. This is part of my thesis, and I'm happy to receive your questions and your comments on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was really fascinating and some great questions at the end. Yeah, I'm particularly struck about, once you move a structure, how it loses its kind of relationship to its original setting. Yeah, that was really interesting. Does anybody have any questions? You're very welcome to pop them in the chat or to just put your camera on, ask directly. If anyone has any questions, please do let us know. Claire sent a comment saying, thank you, that was fascinating.
Thank you.
Nilina.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yes, Ian. It's actually so. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for moderating the discussion. Hello. And Ian, it's nice to put a face to your name because I know you wrote to me and wanting to see my research. So
Yeah.
I was quite delighted when your name came up in the CHF list of talks. More than a question, actually, it's I find these parallels quite fascinating because my research was actually about how Calcutta has more in common, let's say, with Penang and Singapore than it has with Bombay because of the trade routes across the Bay of Bengal. So there was not only exchange of people, like Henry Hoyne Fox, you showed the Secretariat building in Yangon. Henry Hoyne Fox was actually in Calcutta before he went to Yangon, where he became the chief consulting architect. But also how methods, approaches, designs, materials were quite interchangeably used across this domain. So political boundaries are relevant today, but there was a time when there was much more exchange going on. So it actually helps me reflect on my work. For example, not the lighthouse, because we don't have lighthouses in Bengal, but certainly the market structures and the use of cast iron. I've never actually looked at some of these buildings and the way you talked of cast iron articulating public spaces and changing the way public space was perceived and used. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, it's not a question, but it's just interesting for me to see the parallels and to where your research actually picks up from where mine leaves off, because mine is more general and then you have gone into more specifics, and so that's very interesting to see these connections. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So it's the same for me. I finally put a face to the name, and I had a wonderful time reading through your dissertation as well. So I look forward to, sharing your contact later on and then having a conversation with you more deeply about Kolkata later on. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank
you.
Brilliant, thank you. So Murray sent a comment as well. Incredibly interesting. Thank you so much. So yeah, well, thank you, Ian. I think we're kind of at time almost, but if there's any other questions or if you want to talk amongst yourselves, I'm just going to stop the recording, I think. And then if you want to have a bit more of a chat, you can.